Hello everybody, it's Jen May from May Dynamics. I apologise that we're a few minutes late. We're down an iPad and we're down a phone today. So we've got a bit of technical issues happening and as a result of being juggling from one piece of equipment to another to get live. Hopefully we're there now, hopefully you can see me and hear me and we can get started. First of all, I hope everybody had a fantastic Easter. I know it was probably the strangest Easter you've had. But at the very least it was a really good excuse to stay home and celebrate our family and what we have and the joy sometimes of eating chocolate and having a little bit of downtime, especially for business owners who tend to work 24/7 sometimes and really need to be reminded that time off is important. So what we're going to talk about today is systems. In May Dynamics we always talk about scale is when you bring together your people, your process and your systems for lasting success. So your people is obvious. You want to have the right people, and usually we don't mean by experience, we mean by aptitude and character. So this is all about recruiting, it's about finding the right people, it's about training them the right way, giving them the right opportunities and then giving them the trust to develop in the right way. I've got people at home, so there's a small person and a teddy bear crawling up on my lap. Yeah, look at this. This is professional. So here we go. This is a good example. So we're talking about random systems today. I realised everything around us is a system. One of our systems is to get our children who are unhappy and scared at the moment. Good at acting, Daisy. To be happy and to get to sleep. And what are the two most important systems we have for getting happy, Daisy? And
teddy bears.
Cuddling and teddy bears. So we can see here two systems: a big cuddle with mummy and a teddy bear. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Do you want to hop down now? Go on, off you go. You can come back again later. Bye bye. Thank you. Can you go away now? Thank you. I think my camera woman might have to lift the camera up a little bit.
I was trying to get that. Okay.
Thank you. So talking about systems, the people we've talked about quickly. The process is all about making sure you're doing the right thing. Far too often people do more than is necessary. So it's all about making sure what we do is all that we need to do. So what we need to do today is different from what we will need to do tomorrow. Some of what we need to do today is reducing the amount that we're doing. And an important part of that is the value add. What are we doing which is actually necessary, either because it's required for regulatory reasons or because our customers actually value it. Camera woman's moving things.
Sorry.
So she's moving one of my systems out of the way to use as a prop for putting the camera onto, which is really helpful. Thanks, camera woman. Next time I'll find a box and find a way to do this without a camera woman. They're not good, especially when they're 12. And then finally we come on to our systems. So, no, you can't use a pepper grinder to prop up my phone. Stop being lazy. So the systems are, pure and simply, the things that we put in place to enable our people to be able to do the processes that we need them to do more easily, more simply, and in a more controlled manner. That's all they are. Systems aren't hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of computer equipment. They're not expensive phones and systems and apps and internet connections and things. Occasionally they can be, sometimes they can be, but that's not how any system should start. At the very simplest, a system needs to start at its most basic level. And that is the things that you need in order to make the process run more streamlined, more simply. So I'm thinking about systems that we all have in our homes. We're stuck in our homes right now. What are the systems we use? Well, they're really simple. We've got a watch. This is a system for telling the time. So I know if it's lunchtime. I know if it's time for my next meeting. We've got storage systems. There's a bookcase behind me. All our books are stood up with their spines facing out, they're vertical, and they're in alphabetical order. It's simple. It means that I know if I need to go and find a book, I can find the right one very quickly and easily. So we're looking at, sorry, I've also had all my notes put out of the way by the slightly over-officious camera woman. Gadgets in general is the other thing. Things like making a cup of tea. How much easier is that if we have a kettle in place rather than having to boil the water?
Sorry.
Right, so I've got a couple of examples that I've got that I want to show you of things that we've done, just to bring this home, and then we'll go on to some systems I've created in real life experience in the past that have been not computer based, and they haven't been computer based because that wasn't the right thing to do. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is cooking. Now, when I was in my 20s, I loved eating, and there were about 3 recipes I loved to make, but I couldn't cook. My mother was the type who had always said, get out of my kitchen, it's my kitchen, I don't want anybody in here messing it up. And so she'd refused to teach myself or my sister to cook, really. When I was at school, I did pretty well at school, but the subject I would always get 2 or 3 out of 10 in was home economics, particularly the cooking part of home economics. And so when I was in my 20s, I didn't know how to cook. And I was living in Switzerland for a while, had a really good friend Judy over there, and she was a great baker. And I could cook by that stage, but I couldn't bake. I think I was about 27. And I, actually, the weekend that I left Switzerland, I stayed in their spare room for a night or 2. And during that time, she said, oh, you think you can't bake? You just need this one book. She gave it to me to read. And then I came home and I bought a copy. So I read this book literally cover to cover in her spare room that weekend, and I was so inspired and interested by what I read. This is why the camera woman needs to hold the phone rather than just leave it propped up against a pepper grinder. So baker rather than a bad baker. So this is the process mapped. This is the procedure. If I decide I want to make an apple pie, I can go in here and I can find step 1, make pastry. Step 2, prepare apples. Step 3, cook them together. Step 4, eat. So this is the person. This is the person who was inspired and motivated, interested in learning, but didn't have the required experience and needed it. This is the process and the procedures for doing it. And the system I have in place now is I have baking tins. I have an oven which holds a decent temperature, and I have a pantry and fridge which are relatively well organised for storage. So, you know, we have our dry food in plastic containers so it doesn't get damp and so the insects don't get in. We have our herbs and spices in 3 of these racks. So each one is in alphabetical order again, a bit anal there, I'm a Virgo. They're in alphabetical order. They are labelled on the top, so I can read it from the top. And these little jars are all designed so they have sprinkle holes, which means sometimes they're big, sometimes they're the small ones, sometimes they're a combination. But it means each herb or spice I can find immediately, and I can measure into my recipes in exactly the right amount of time, in the quickest and most efficient possible way. It's just a system, that's all it is. Second system I wanted to talk to you about was this one. Now this is something I made about 10 years ago. And it's a bit cumbersome, but it also works as a decoration in our sort of office area. So it's a filing system for home. We've got 3 sections here: read, act, and file. So basically what happens, mail comes in, it all gets put straight into the read section. This is unopened envelopes, notes from school, that kind of thing. As and when it's read, if it's something that needs to be done, acted upon, it goes into the act section in the middle. So this is, for example, a form that needs to be filled in. This is an old example of a working with children check. It doesn't matter. It just means if something's in there, something has to be done to it. It's a note that has to be signed. It's a form that has to be filled in. It's something that has to be responded to. And if it doesn't have to be responded to, but we want a record of it, it goes into this back section, file. And then it can go into our sort of permanent filing system. And this is information about my daughter's vaccinations that she's due this year. It's not something I need to actively do anything about. It's just something I need to know about if there's ever an issue in the future. So, again, a really simple system we have at home. Anybody can establish at home, whether it's for your current working from home needs or just for your family's paperwork needs. All right, and then going on to quickly, a little bit of an overview of some of the systems we've created that haven't required computers. So Garry often talks about, he was a leader of several teams in a bank a few years ago, and they actually had a system in place that wasn't necessarily working perfectly. So they were subverting their process to fit the system they had, and it wasn't the best way. So what happens is they actually took a step back and they stopped using that system for a part of their process, and instead they went back to relying on team meetings on a daily basis, and also a large whiteboard with all of the stages of the jobs or the cases on it, and also magnets to show the progress of them. So when people came into the room, each person knew the cases they were assigned to, they would move through the magnets to the place that they should be, and then they would discuss the up-to-date progress as of the moment that people had arrived in that room. It put the onus back onto each individual and the team to be actually doing the work that was required outside of those meetings, not using it as an excuse to talk about something they hadn't done. And it also meant that there was a snapshot every day and really simply done in seconds, contributed to by everybody who was part of that process. So another one is I've worked a lot in logistics as a logistics analyst, and there's a couple of times where we've got two teddies now, where we've looked at systems, and they've sometimes been fantastic. So you can't manage stock without a good inventory management system. You need a properly organised warehouse with reference numbering, things like barcode scanning, all sorts of things that we've put in place to make stock management a lot simpler. But sometimes it's not needed. So a couple of examples of that is, I worked in renewable energy once, and we were bringing in photovoltaic cells, so the solar panels that you see on roofs, and each pallet of those might be worth $150,000. And what was happening was that obviously they were being shipped through China or Germany, across the sea, into Australia, sometimes in Fremantle, but more often than not in the eastern states, and then brought across the country. And what we realised was that sometimes they were damaged on delivery, and there was no way of proving at what point that the issue had happened, the damage had occurred. And so whilst obviously you have appropriate insurance in place, it becomes a lot simpler to cut down the number of issues if you can identify the source of those issues. And what we actually found by research was there are these really clever little devices which are G-force trackers basically. And what they do is a little bit like an airbag in a car, I suppose. They pretty much go off if a certain force is detected. And it doesn't, so for some things it doesn't matter. So for some of them, what we did was put on each one of our pallets, we put on one of these little stickers. They cost, I think, $5, and they would indicate if enough force had happened that was likely to have damaged any of the panels on it. And that meant immediately on receipt in our warehouse, we could check that, and we could visually see, yep, we've got an issue with this, that's going to be a problem. Now, to be honest, for almost everything we were doing, that was enough to indicate that we didn't have a problem, that these were coming in not broken, and we didn't need to do anything more. I think there was one route where, for example, we did have an issue, and we put in some more expensive ones, which were incredibly clever. They did the same thing, but they actually tracked the time and the GPS location. So you could see, for example, that I think we identified at one point there was a rail line coming across Australia, and there was one point where the gauge was changing or something, and as a result there was enough force sometimes going through the train that the panels, the force would actually mount at that point, and that's when our panels are likely to be being broken. So by proving that, you can then go back to the people who are causing the issue. This was a railway company, a freight company, nothing to do with us, but just meant that that could then be resolved. And that would have saved millions of dollars each year for them and the insurance company each year in cost that people would have been claiming for damaged goods on receipt. So again, tiny little stickers, whether or not embedded in the system, perfect choice sometimes. Second logistics system I wanted to talk about was something called Kanban. So I also worked in the security industry for a while, and we had a lot of CCTV cameras and a lot of expensive equipment around security. But there were also a lot of things like poles, brackets, screws, flanges, all sorts of things that were tiny. You know, these things might have been 50 cents, they might have been a couple of dollars, but if we didn't have them on a job, the job couldn't go ahead. And if the job couldn't go ahead, then it might be a day's labour wasted. It might be 3 hours of transport wasted. It might be a contract delayed, which meant penalty clauses. So for the sake of a $2 piece of equipment, you could be losing $1,000 potentially, or more. So obviously that wasn't something that we wanted to happen. And there were some major issues with stock control in general. So the focus very much needed to be on improve the detailed stock control for things like the security cameras, not worry about it for the sundry items, for those little $2 pieces. So what we did was something called a Kanban system, which is really simple. It's a card-based, paper-based system. Tubs like this one, again, we might have 100 bolts put into this. That's all they were. It might be a $2 bolt. And at the back of that would be a little pack which might have 10 bolts or 20 bolts, the number that you might use in a week, and a little packet that basically had a card in that said, if you crack this packet open, you need to take this card and you need to put it into the reorder because you've got into your emergency stock now. And once you did that, the card would go into the reorder section. The stock controller would know that we were down to the last 10 or 20 bolts. They would order the usual number of 200, and that would be enough to get them through. Pardon?
You're on 10%.
Okay, that's fine. I'm 10% charged now, apparently. So again, it was something which meant the stock controller would spend minutes a week ordering the essential parts, not worrying about where they'd gone to. To be honest, I don't care if this $2 bolt has gone to customer A, B or C. I want to know that customer A, B or C was invoiced in the first place for the right number of bolts on their job. And then I want to trust that my people and my process will get those bolts to that job and put them on in the right way. So again, the system in this case was something really simple, very graceful and elegant in its simplicity. And that's the important thing. If you get to the point where, yes, you know that your system is requiring you to invest in beautiful automation, technical features, this sort of thing, make sure that the focus is on the simplicity. Everything you put in place needs to make what you're doing in your life easier. It needs to make it more controlled. It needs to make it more straightforward. It needs to make it better able to be communicated to the team, to the next person who's doing it, or to the auditors who need to be able to show that you're doing everything right. So that's it. Pure and simple. Systems are things which enable your people and your processes to work in the simplest possible way. Gary and I are both systems people in both senses of the word, the IT type and the non-IT type. So if you have any questions about what systems might be the most appropriate to help you in your business, help your people, help make your process work better, please give us a shout and we'll be happy to chat to you. Thank you everybody. I'll speak to you next week. Bye bye.